Hello and welcome to my webinar. My name's Jade Catterson and I'm the course director for the BA Geography course here at Coventry University. I've been teaching in social and development geographies for a number of years now, and within social geographies I'm particularly interested in the life course and how people might be marginalised across the life course, so looking specifically at children and youth, but also at the other end of the life course at the elderly community. And that's what I'm going to be focusing my talk on today, thinking about the social and spatial marginalisation of old people in society. As many of you will be aware from your own studies, we do have an ageing population in Britain, which comes with the opportunities but also challenges. And we'll start to think toward the end of the webinar about what those challenges might be and actually how we can start to implement strategies as a community to prepare and cope with this expanding population and for those people living longer in life. So some of the aims of the session will be to look at ageism and age discrimination, what the roots are of ageism, how it's derived, and also how it might intersect with ethnicity, gender, disability, for example, and how those people who fit into both categories might be multiply marginalised. And then finally, thinking about how ageism itself manifests itself differently, socially and spatially for the elderly. In terms of thinking about social geography, you really want to be considering the fact that we all have our own identity, and our identity can shape and influence how others treat us, but also how we engage in the spaces around us and with other people. So for instance, I'm a Caucasian woman in her 30s. How does that influence the spaces that I can access, who I spend time with, and how people perceive me, I guess, as well? How I'm looked upon within my community. And what we have is a lot of geographers recognising the body as a space, a personal space. So that does seem quite unusual, but academics like Jill Valentine, who's quite a prolific social geographer, refers to the body as the geography closest in. So like the spaces around us, like the natural world, we can alter our body, we can adapt it for our own benefits. It might be to reflect our personality or to fit in a subculture. We can get piercings, we can get tattoos, we can change how we dress. And all of this we have relative control over. But also the body itself can often be a site where other people can regulate it. It can be through laws or policies which suggest or tell us where we can and cannot access. So young people, for instance, cannot access certain places that are created for adults. But also there can be cultural norms or societal norms in a particular place which make us feel excluded or make us feel not welcome in particular places as well. And what you'll find is that there's certain people in societies that have greater power than others and therefore can influence people's lives more prevalently. And you'll often see academics refer to that within the UK context as your white male middle class. And obviously that will differ in many different societies across the world, but it's recognised that that's one group who may have greater power and fit within this so-called norm in society, and therefore can shape or influence laws or policies that affect other people's lives. Thankfully, we are starting to see changes in that, and we are starting to see more inclusivity in terms of how influence is created, but there's still quite a way to go, and elderly people are some of the groups that are most marginalised within our society today. In terms of thinking of the body and age then, we obviously all look very different at different stages of the life course, and our physical appearance can be one way in which we can categorise different groups and we can tell whether someone is a child or of working age or older. But that's not the only way that we need to consider age. We need to be thinking of age as also a social category, a socially constructed thing, where we, as a society, have often placed expectations or social norms on particular groups at particular stages of the life course. And with that comes some limitations, because we are expecting older people to perhaps engage in hobbies such as knitting, or we're expecting children or youth to be interested in certain toys or certain music. And even with women at adult age, we're expecting them to be interested in having children and reproducing or getting married at a particular age. So these expectations are there. They're almost like stereotypes that we have of various different age groups. And for the most part, they can be harmless, but in other aspects, they can actually start to shape how we perceive certain groups and therefore how we treat them. And this can be really the start of how elderly people can face age discrimination. In terms of the elderly in Western society, unfortunately, we're starting to see that the older body, so older people generally, are just not valued in the same way as they are in other cultures for their wisdom or experience. We're finding that many elderly people have been deemed as socially or economically of less worth. Economically, because they're no longer participating in the labour market and therefore paying things like taxes, so they're recognised as economically dependent. But also for women who have made it past the menopause, they're no longer able to have children and reproduce, and that has become like a societal norm for women to have children, and therefore when they get to this point in their life, it's actually recognised that they may not have the same social worth, which sounds very, very harsh, but this is some of the work that's been produced in this, which identifies this idea that we have such a fixated stereotype on certain groups that actually when they get to the latter stages of their life, their worth is measured in this way. In terms of defining ageism, the World Health Organization refers to it as the stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination of people based on their age. And this can be through a number of practices. It can be anything from employment opportunities to accessing spaces and social services, right through to stereotypes in the media that we have. Ageism is everywhere, and actually it's something that maybe many of us have participated in at some point in our life, myself probably included. It's easy to make jokes about people getting older, and it's become therefore quite normalised compared to other prejudice like racism or sexism, other forms of discrimination like that, which are often widely countered. So if we were to hear someone being racist or sexist in society, we would normally, we would hopefully counter that. However, something like ageism is never really recognised as quite as serious. Why is it not recognised as quite so serious? I guess we see it everywhere. So there's this idea of banal discrimination, and you can argue whether you agree with it being banal or not. But you'll see it in birthday cards like this, you'll see it in jokes. It's hard to get away from, and it's all about making jokes about older people getting degenerative illnesses that can affect sort of their memory or their bodily functions. And these things are kind of recognized as being humorous things to talk about. And actually, for many, it can be really, really harmful and offensive. Some academics, however, are considering whether emphasizing the discrimination of the elderly in this way is in somehow though reducing the importance or significance of discrimination against other marginalised groups due to race or disability. And again, it's suggested that perhaps that is much more of a serious crime, and therefore we should be placing the same emphasis on age. But I believe that banal discrimination or discrimination in this form is really the start of many other prejudice against the elderly community that can really impact their everyday lives. Just to follow on from that, Erving Goffman talks about infantilization of the elderly. And he refers to infantilization as this behavioral pattern. It's where people will treat the elderly like a child, and that's where you get this term from, infantilization. It's speaking to them in a childlike manner, using terms like old dear or pet, quite patronizing terms, or perhaps talking on behalf of the elderly, so maybe speaking to their adult children. Okay, and it's really demeaning the value again of the older generation. And this can be exacerbated further when it comes to the elderly who are in need of additional support. So at the very frail stages of their lives, where they maybe need fed or dressed or bathed. And again, this only allows them to feel even more worthless, and by exacerbating this with other engagements like talking to adult children on their behalf or speaking to them like a child, will make them feel even worse and reduce their confidence. And it is something that organisations like Age UK have recognised are happening on quite a regular basis. In terms of age itself as well, we need to also consider the fact that we've been talking here about the elderly as one unified cohort, and actually it's really important that we, even within this category, think about how we might break that up further. You do have people who have just recently retired, who are in their late 60s, who are very much active, probably traveling, maybe even engaging in other part-time work, and therefore are not really in the same category as the older generation, who might be a lot more frail and in need of support. So it is important that we also don't recognise this as one big category, the 65s and over, because it will have an impact in terms of the policies or the strategies we put in place to prepare for these people's unique needs. In terms of the physical body then, Furman has done some research on this, associating age with the unwelcome changes in physical appearance. And this is very much, again, a very Western idea behind getting older. Many people around the world value age and value the aging process itself, but we have quite a fixation here in places like the UK on physical appearance and on youth and thinness, and this is often directed more prevalently at women as well. And you've seen this in many advertisements, I'm sure. So we've got advertisements, for example, from Olay. I'll never look back, I'll just look younger. This idea of trying to turn back the stages of aging and in some way not show that you're getting older. In other societies, aging is something to be celebrated. You've made it to the later stages of your life. Not everyone makes it to those stages. So that's something to be celebrated. But there's been very much a focus within the Western society in terms of advertisements and media associated with looking younger. And that comes with certain types of beauty products, and even in some cases, surgery. So you'll see advertisements here, and these are older ones about the impact that looking older could have on relationships as well, and this pressure on the wife particularly, and a woman within the household, to look as young as possible. And again, that adds further pressures on women within society and further marginalises them. Other ways in which the elderly can be at risk of marginalisation are through their socioeconomic status. There has been work done by academics such as Peter Townsend to connect older people with poverty, and you'll have seen that all over. You've probably seen it in news headlines as well, where often elderly people are struggling maybe to pay for fuel. So that's why we have a fuel allowance in the UK. And what Townsend suggests, though, is that there is something called structured dependency happening here. And that's really where state laws have been created for people to tell them when they can retire, and to tell them how much of a pension they can have. And also it restricts their social activity as well. So when you get to this stage of your life, you perhaps don't have the same control as you might do over your earnings and your finances. And particular groups who are greatest risk here are single older people who maybe have a household to pay for on their own, and also women who perhaps haven't worked outside of the home during their life and therefore are very much reliant on a state pension. In terms of the elderly and ethnicity, there hasn't been a great deal done on this, unfortunately. Sherlock's work back in 2002 produced some work referring to the fact that elderly people actually felt quite discriminated by their peers, which is interesting. So most of their peers were Caucasian and had lived in the country all of their life, and therefore they felt that not only were they discriminated by peers within their group, but also activities designed for the elderly through organisations like Age UK or Age Concern were more fitted with people of Caucasian background, British people who'd lived there all of their lives, really. And there wasn't enough recognition for groups in society who'd maybe moved to the country as an older person, or had lived there for a number of years but were from a different cultural or religious background. What you will find with migration is that majority of people that migrate are from the younger generation, and they will move to the places like the UK for work or educational commitments. And as a result, it's not until the last sort of 10, 15 years are we starting to see more and more people within the elderly community being from different ethnic minority groups. And groups such as the Windrush group, for example, from the West Indies, are one particular group that we're seeing in this category in 65s and over now. And it's interesting to think, well, what can we learn from other societies and other cultures about things like their approach to elderly care? How do they care for their elderly? Do they have extended family units? But also their approach to things like death and the afterlife as well, and how in some cases they can be more accepting of getting older because of their religious values. Getting older is often associated with the end of life, and that can create a bit of a moral panic or fear among many people in this country. Other groups that you may want to consider, the LGBTQI plus community. We do have elderly people that are based within this community, and they're often very much overlooked when it comes to their specific needs. And that can often be through the group itself, the community itself, where many people find that most of the activities or events associated with the LGBTQI plus community, such as Pride, are often designed for the younger generation in mind. That also being said, you will find issues in terms of financial insecurity that come with the elderly community from this group as well, because they maybe were less likely to have got married. Same-sex marriage only came in most recently. In the last 10 years, we're starting to see it across the UK as a whole. So therefore, many older people within the LGBTQI plus community might not be married and therefore might not have the same financial rights in terms of their marriage. And there's also a great deal of stigma that comes with your sexuality at this age as well, where it's maybe not recognized quite so much. And there has been some stories to suggest that actually community members working with the elderly have not always taken into consideration the specific needs and relationships that these elderly people are part of as well. In terms of space is really important in geography, and elderly people's spatial geographies is something that a number of people have been studying. And when we started to see age segregated retirement homes or nursing homes, places designed specifically for the elderly community, then we started to see the elderly being removed even further spatially from society. And that led to greater loneliness, greater social isolation from family, but also friends and community, and leads them in some way to be placed in a separate aspect of their community from the rest of their friends or family. And that has detrimental impacts longer term. It's argued as well that many spaces designed for families now, so UK homes generally, are designed around the nuclear family. And they're not always open to having extended family units living there. So there's maybe not an additional bathroom or an additional kitchen and living area designed for other adult members of the household. And that can therefore prevent more elderly people living with their adult children as well. In terms of people's space in regards to the role of the media, well, actually we're finding that elderly people are very much influenced by what they see in the media. And this can also have an impact on their mobility and their spatial geographies. So many elderly people might be less likely to leave their homes or to visit certain places outside because of fears of crime. And there's certain media academics who will look into this more greatly, but they suggest that elderly people actually make for better news and better victims. Sounds quite an unusual statement to make, but what they're suggesting here is that there's a disproportionate number of stories associated with elderly people because they make for better headlines. And this can also impact intergenerational relations, so relationships between members of the younger generations as well. And it really reduces the mobility and the spatial geographies of the elderly community who are afraid of being victims of crime. In one way, elderly people can be victims of crime though, but it's much more likely to be through online activities or over the phone. So ways in which the elderly are maybe not quite as tech savvy as some of the younger generations, and that's obviously a very big generalization, but older generations generally are much more new to technology and therefore can be more easily scammed, and potentially as well because they're older, they may feel more comfortable speaking with somebody over the phone, because that's something that's natural to them. So we're starting to see people becoming victims of fraud in that way, because they may be more trusting of authority figures. In terms of elderly engagement with cyberspace, as we see the cyber world sort of explode a little with globalization and more people engaging across the world and traveling across the world to live or to work, this starts to isolate the elderly even further, because they aren't part of this world. They maybe struggle to access things like Zoom or Skype to be able to communicate with people, and therefore this attributes to their sense of loneliness even further. There's also issues in terms of financial status and knowledge on rights as well that you may want to consider here. Actually, it's felt that a lot of the important information and forms for perhaps receiving disability benefits or for pensions often are online only, and that can have implications in terms of older people knowing their rights, knowing what money they're entitled to and what they deserve, and therefore this can have long-term financial implications on their well-being as well. And here's some of the information regarding that as well. In terms of accessing technology and financial support, it is found that in association with older people often being from a lower socioeconomic group and having a lower income, that they will struggle to access technology and financial support as readily as other groups. Other ways that we can observe space as well is this idea of a landscape of memories that Riles talks about, where elderly people have a sense of identity that's connected with places that they've grown up in, that they've lived in, and that they have memories in. And in that way, they're able to recreate imaginations into the past, and that becomes almost an escape from their bodies. And this has been recognised more prevalently around older people who are perhaps confined to spaces because of their lack of mobility and lack of being able to leave their homes. So perhaps during COVID, or because of a fear of crime, or financial implications as well that could be limiting their spatial geographies. It's felt that the older generations have this landscape of memories where they connect back to old times and like to reimagine past histories and past memories. Other ways, though, if we look actually more positively at ways in which certain groups are almost being excluded, but in some ways being more included in society, is age-segregated spaces are actually quite nice places to live. And this is one example here in a place called Sun City in Arizona. And this has been designed as an elderly people's retirement complex, but actually it's a much more sophisticated one than we might have seen in the UK. Places where they're going against the stereotypes of what older people should and shouldn't be doing, and letting people have relative freedom, but within the safety of this retirement complex. And there's activities like cheerleading, like swimming, and many say this is the way forward. You could argue, however, that spaces like this are really designed for older people who have more money and more wealth, and so this isn't open to everyone, but for those who are more affluent, this might be something to aspire to. Older people as well can be in some ways at an advantage in regards to their numbers. in terms of voting. So there's this idea of grey power that we're seeing across the US, the UK. This particular image here is from New Zealand, and we're starting to see, as we have an older, expanding, aging population, that actually they're having more and more say in terms of voting strategies. And there is a correlation that we're seeing between age and political choice generally within the UK. And I've put this little table up here from Crispin Pearce's work, and they were able to show here in terms of the EU referendum that the proportion of older people who chose to leave was over the ages of 65 plus was 61.3% compared with only 40.9% of the younger generation. And we're starting to see that actually they have a lot of power when it comes to the vote and a lot of swaying in terms of the way in which we see political decisions and parties coming into power now. And there has been arguments and disagreements really with this. Many younger people feel that they've been let down by the older generation in terms of some votes, and would suggest that, you know, as they're a lot older, they're perhaps not thinking to the future of what the implications for this will be, but more connected with past ideologies and what perhaps society was before. And therefore there's arguments there that that as this older generation have less years to live, that their votes are now having a really strong influence on how the younger generations will live for years to come. Which is an interesting thought process, but everyone has the right to vote over the age of 18, and therefore they have just as much right as everyone else to have their say in this. But it's interesting to think about where these shifts in voting strategies and various different parties come from as well. And with that, I will say as well that you will have a lot of politicians that will target this older generation as well, because they are aware that the older generation could be the difference between them getting into power or not. We are seeing now this older generation expanding, and we're going to see it continuing to happen. Here we have some examples here across the world. We've got Japan, obviously, is known for its aging population. The UK still relatively high at almost 30%. And then you have some of your lower income countries actually across the world, which still see a relatively high youth population. So there is variations in this across the world, and it would be interesting to see, as we start to see more economic development, will there be shifts in terms of aging populations for many of your countries within the developing world context. With it also comes concerns and opportunities for the future. There are many ways in which we can support and begin to think about the specific needs of the elderly population. It's up to policymakers to begin putting into plan more systems which will assist elderly people in terms of their health care, in terms of their living situations, but also things like their social participation in society. And we need to be aware more as a community as well by respecting our elderly community and engaging them more in terms of everyday life. And at the minute, it's architectural restrictions in space, but also social norms that are being pushed by those in power that are influencing the way in which we treat the elderly community. And this is definitely something that will need to be addressed in the coming years. We are seeing things like global age-friendly cities that many cities are signing up for across the world. And again, they they take on board much of what I've just said, but also more specific factors such as having outdoor spaces and buildings and transportation that fit with the elderly community as well. So it'd be interesting to see how these global age-friendly cities emerge in coming years, and what we can do and how we begin to manage within the UK, but also many other Western nations, our elderly population. So just to conclude then, elderly marginalisation has been relatively overlooked actually in academic and mainstream discourse comparatively with other groups, and that's mostly why I've covered it as well today. There is a great deal of intersection with disability, sexuality and socioeconomic status, and that leads people to become multiply marginalised. And also within the UK, as we have this ageing population, could there be strategies therefore to maybe increase immigration and to engage with immigration among this younger working age group to support this older community? And is that a potential idea for moving forward? Other different initiatives have been set up, mostly to allow for greater dignity and respect of those people in the latter years of the life. And if there's one thing you want to take away from this, that would be really it. And finally, I've just got a little image here of me and my own gran, who sadly passed away when I was 18. But yeah, she was a real cool woman actually. Lived a brandy, lived a day out at the beach. This is me and her up in the north coast of Northern Ireland on a bit of a day trip. So what I'd suggest as well, if you are watching this, is maybe reach out to an elderly neighbour, an elderly member of the family, and get chatting to them and increase that intergenerational communication, because I think that's something that is unfortunately being lost a little bit in society now, where we don't have those strong relationships between elderly and youth quite so much anymore because of the cyber world and many other factors that I've looked at today. Many thanks for listening, and hopefully you've enjoyed this. If you've got any questions for me, I'll be available in a couple of weeks to answer those for you on our Q&A session. Thank you.